division in USPSA. About 1990, he mounted an aimpoint style red dot. It looks kind of like what we call the aimpoint pro today, big rifle optic. He mounted one of those to one of his 1911s and started shooting competition with it. That is the first documented red dot on a pistol that we have. He then proceeded to win the 1991 USPSA 50-second Nationals with that gun. And all of a sudden, people were like, we can mount these things with pistols? We should do that. Fast forward now, here we are, 30-ish years later, and red dots on pistols are a majority of what we see, okay? But it all started with Jerry Barnhart. Over time, now, the thing you need to understand about Jerry's gun, okay? It was a rifle optic that was mounted through a brace to the frame of his gun. That is not the same systems that we are using here today, but that's what started the evolution. Today, we have slide-mounted optics, okay? One of the interesting things that happen is you need to understand how optics are developed, right? When we started putting red dots on pistols, we were taking rifle optics and putting them on pistols, specifically the slides. The G-forces running through a rifle are not the same as those running through a slide that reciprocates under recoil. So we started breaking optics really fast, especially in the 90s, all right? For a long time, and still today they're still around, right? The Trijicon RMR was kind of the king daddy of all pistol optics. The original Trijicon RMR was a rifle optic. It was a miniaturized rifle optic that someone said, hey, that's really tiny. I'll bet I could put that on my pistol. And they did, right? But the thing we quickly discovered is because of those G-forces, we started breaking them really fast. The Gen 1 Trijicon RMR. And then again, it wasn't set up as a pistol optic. It didn't have pistol shooters in mind. It had rifle shooters in mind. That's why it had a bottom-loading battery, right? So you had to take the optic off every single time you wanted to change the battery, put it back on, because there was the assumption that, well, if you're taking your optic off your rifle, you're obviously going to zero it when you put it back on. So no big deal, all right? Time has evolved. Nowadays, we have so many offerings because optics are being built with pistol shooters in mind as opposed to rifle shooters in mind. Now, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a pecking order as far as red dot optics go from things I've seen throughout the past, right? Now, like I said, there are a ton of optics out there, okay? Ton of optics. Some are better than others, some have more features than others, but for the most part, if we stick to the optics I'm going to talk about, life will be good. This is based purely on three factors: durability, performance, right? And something else that I can't remember. No, durability, performance, and longevity. Okay, and these are the things we look at when we're deciding on what optics we're going to use. Right? So, kind of the front runners, or what I consider the front runners, the Trijicon SRO. Many of you have probably seen a Trijicon SRO before. It's a big round window, right, that has a top-loading battery. This optic is incredibly good, especially for people who like big windows on optics. The thing that happens when you put a big window on an optic is that you typically see the dot with more deviation in your shooting technique. That speaks to a lot of people. It makes them feel better, and that's cool. There is a lot of hate thrown at the Trijicon SRO because of its durability. And really this all stems from an individual doing drop tests on them, a guy named Aaron Cowan. If you aren't familiar with him, he is a really fantastic dude when it comes to testing optics and stuff. But his test is to take an optic, or take a gun with an optic, turn it upside down, drop it from 2 stories onto concrete. Surprise, surprise, the optic broke. Who knew? So there's a real easy fix for this. Don't drop your gun from 2 stories on concrete, all right? But that optic gets a lot of hate, and a lot of people will say it's not duty grade. You shouldn't put it on carry guns. I will tell you that is false, all right? There are more SROs being used in law enforcement departments, military units, and civilian carriers than probably any other optic right now. Performance-wise, the optic is very good. It utilizes what we call an open emitter system. That means that the dot, which is an LED light, sits in the rear. It is then projected through the air onto a front pane of glass, all right? The downside to open emitters is they are open to all the atmospherics in between the emitter and the glass itself, okay? So that's something you need to consider, especially when environmental conditions are a concern of yours. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today, all right? So that's the Trigicon SRO. Along with that, the HoloSun 507 Comp, okay? Is anyone running a 507 Comp? Okay, cool. So here's the deal. 507 Comps are huge, all right? And I have a really good relationship with the HoloSun guys. They came out to a class I was doing. I said, guys, that window's pretty big. It's like I'm shooting in IMAX, which they thought was hilarious, right? But I also told them, I think we might have reached the point where we're putting rifle optics on pistols again, because that thing is like this, or at least it appears like that, right? It is also an open emitter system. However, the durability on that system is fantastic, all right? One of the major features of the 507 Comp is that it has multiple reticle choices in there. One of the guys at HoloSun told me, if you can't find a reticle in that optic that you like, you probably shouldn't shoot red dots. Not entirely sure I agree with that, but there are tons of options inside of there. You've got a 2-minute dot, you've got a 2-minute dot with like a 4-minute circle around it, you got 8-minute circles, you got all sorts of stuff going on in there. If those features and benefits speak to you, by all means utilize that optic. Competitively, I think it's probably the best competition optic for most people, all right? So, that's the 507 Comp. A lot of people hate on HoloSun, right? And as I've been made aware, certain instructors out here hate on HoloSun, and that's fine, okay? However, I probably see more optics than most any other instructor in the world when it comes to shooting pistols. The HoloSun is probably the most prominent optic when it comes to people putting them on pistols. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the durability of the optics. They are up there with every optic you think is bomb-proof. The HoloSun is just as bomb-proof, right? Number two, price point. They're affordable. And if you have one, you should have two. And I can easily get two HoloSuns for the same cost as one of the other manufacturer's optics, all right? Number three, their customer service. I have absolutely, guys, don't get it wrong, I have broken every single optic on the planet. Every one of them. Any optic I've ever tried, I have figured out a way to break it. I've seen me do it, all right? Here's the deal. I have absolutely broken a HoloSun optic, called HoloSun, say, hey, and I'm no one special as far as they're concerned, all right? Hey, I broke my optic. They're like, cool. Didn't ask me how I broke it. Didn't ask any questions. They said, send it back in. Here's a shipping label, and we'll send you one out. Before I even got that optic in the mail to them, the other one was already on its way to me. That's how much they care about getting their product out to you, all right? And they stand behind their product. So you can throw all the shade you want on HoloSun, but there ain't no other company that's doing the stuff that HoloSun is. Also, the reason all your other optics are under $2,000 a piece is because HoloSun's out there making them for $300 a piece, all right? So if it wasn't for HoloSun, you probably wouldn't be able to afford multiple optics on guns. So HoloSun gets a huge plug from me. My favorite optic, and this is a preference thing, okay? My favorite optic in the world is the HoloSun 509T, all right? Now, the 509T has a couple of different features than any of the other optics I've mentioned thus far. It utilizes an enclosed emitter system, which means that there is a pane of glass inside a titanium housing on theirs. The emitter is located inside that housing, and then projects onto another window at the front. So I've got window, emitter, and another window. What this does is this encloses the emitter inside and protects it from all the atmospherics, right? Things like rain, things like snow, humidity, all those things that fog up your glass, right? Or get in the way of your dot. The 509, because it's enclosed, doesn't allow those things to affect it, right? It's one of the reasons I really like that optic, because I tend to shoot a lot outdoors, and I don't get to choose the weather when I shoot outdoors. So I typically, especially when I teach law enforcement, I run outside the waistband. So my gun is exposed to the rain and the snow and the heat and the dust and everything. When I draw that gun, all that stuff just falls off my optic, all right? That's one of the major benefits of enclosed emitter optics, all right?
AJ?
Yes, sir.
For concealability, how does that work?
It's great. I have no issues when it comes to concealability because it's really no bigger than, it's much smaller than the other two optics I've mentioned, and it's really no bigger than any of the next options I'm going to talk about, right? A lot of people, it has the perception of being large because it's enclosed and you see the housing come back so far. Yeah. They also have, which I'll mention here in a minute, they've got smaller versions of it that if you're concerned about the concealability, you can look at those as well. Things like the EPS and the EPS carry, they're basically just miniaturized 509Ts, all right?
And can you switch the reticle with those?
You can. So Holosun is pretty well known for having two reticle choices, or really three reticle choices. You have a 2-minute of angle dot, which is a very tiny dot. You have a 35-minute of angle circle around that dot, or you can eliminate the dot in the center and just have the 35-minute circle, all right? I'm gonna tell you guys about reticles now, all right? The busier you make the reticle, typically the harder it is to shoot, all right? Now, that circle dot speaks to a lot of people because we think I'm seeing more, therefore it must be better. What I have found is typically individuals that end up running those kind of busy reticle systems tend to shoot the first red or green thing they see. Unfortunately on that, that's typically the top of the circle. And you start hitting where you don't want to hit because you haven't really referenced the 0 point of that reticle system, okay? The other thing is when it comes to precision, right? The dot is 0 to the center of the actual dot, not the circle, okay? So you have to understand that because there's so much light being projected in your face, it busies up what you're trying to focus on, which is the target. If you guys are running a dot in a circle system, you'll probably know exactly what I mean when we start zeroing the guns, all right?
How about the chevron?
Okay, so the chevron, typically that's put on an optic system known as the ACSS reticle. It has a chevron in the center of it with a 100 MOA circle around it. Cool training tool. However, chevrons are a rifle reticle that someone put on a pistol, right? Chevrons are really designed for you to zero them to the tip of the chevron. In order to align the tip of the chevron with your target, what do you have to look at? The tip of the chevron, right? That's not how red dots work. Okay, so I'm not a huge fan of it. There is, I don't know if it's been released, but there is a dot version of that, and that is a very cool training tool. Because when you present the gun correctly, you never see the 100 MOA circle around it, but when you don't present it correctly, you see the sides of that, and it tells you where you need to correct. I think it's a good training tool. I just don't put it on my guns. Yeah, that's fine. All right, so those are kind of my lead optics. The next spot, right, is most of the optics many of you will see. These are things like the Holosun 507 or the 407. Now, again, we talked about the 507 having the dot and the circle versus the 407 that just has the dot. For me, most of my guns just have the 407 because I don't care about that circle. Right? So can you save a little money? Sure you can. It just depends on what reticle you want to utilize. I know some very good shooters, despite what I believe, where they shoot the circle dot, and they are grandmaster level shooters. If it works for you, it works for you. I just know that that's a little busy for me. So can you get away with the 407? Sure, if you really want to. Right? Other optics in this kind of category. Right? Like I said, the Holosun 407, the Holosun 507, the Holosun 508T, those are all excellent optics. Some other companies, this is where I would put the Trijicon RMR, all right? The big thing about the Trijicon RMR, there are 3 different versions of the Trijicon RMR. There's the first version we talked about, which is the rifle optic that people started putting on pistols. One of the problems we see with that is, number one, the window size is incredibly small. All right, it's basically a little larger than an inch all the way around. For a lot of people, that scares them, all right? Because if your technique is incorrect, you ain't gonna see shit, all right? That's one of the problems. The other problem is it has the bottom loading battery, which means I have to remove the optic every time I want to change the battery, right? If you're like me, I ain't got time for that, and I don't want to check the zero every single time I change my battery, especially if I'm in the middle of a class changing a battery, okay? So, that's some of the downsides. The first version, the Gen 1, was not what I considered reliable, but it was the gold standard at one time. So much so that we used to do a demo where we would hammer in nails with that optic, and it would be just fine. The problem is when you run a lot of G-forces through it, the internal wiring systems would lose contact on the batteries, right? So they would die fairly often. That was the problem. In the Gen 2 version, while they stuck to the same kind of idea of a bottom loading battery in a small window, what they did was they fixed the wiring and the contact systems so you didn't lose contact on the batteries. Much better optic. Now, we have the Trijicon RMR HD. And the Trijicon RMR HD is kind of like taking a Trijicon SRO and the RMR, making a baby, and that's the Trijicon RMR HD, all right? It's got a much bigger window, still kind of a square-shaped window. It sits slightly forward. It's an open emitter optic, but it has some really interesting features. Probably the best feature on that optic, and also the reason it commands a $700 price point, is it has a forward sensing light, forward light sensor thing, right? So most optics that have things like solar panels on them, they use ambient light to judge how bright or how dim the optic should be, okay? I don't like that. I want to control my dot, but if you do like that, it judges at the gun. The Trijicon RMR HD has a forward-facing sensor, and it judges light at the target, right? I have seen with that optic that it is pretty much always correct, right? Because it bases off of what the target sees, not necessarily where you are. So it corrects the brightness for what the target needs. That's a very cool feature. I don't know if it's a $700 feature, but it's something really neat, all right? It has now a top-loading battery, so you don't have to remove it every time you want to change your batteries. And it gives you the adjustment and the ability to brighten the dot and dim the dot. It's also available in multiple reticle sizes, 2-minute dot, 3-minute dot, 5-minute dot, so on and so forth, right? If that speaks to you and those features speak to you, especially as a defensive shooter, by all means, knock yourself out. Just remember, if you have one, you probably should have two. And that's a pretty big price point for two optics, right? The next one, there's a whole line of the Holosun carry style optics, and they're very good. The EPS carry and the EPS, I think, are very good systems. They're all enclosed emitter optics, right? Like I said before, they're just miniaturized 509 optics. Put them on your gun, they'll do great work. Understand the window size is slightly smaller.
So for a smaller gun?
For their design, actually, so the way they were originally designed was so they fit a 1911 slide with a direct mill to the slide, right? They're designed for things like the 365 and the macro and things like that. Any gun that's a little smaller gun, right? So they don't hang over the sides, right? Good optics though, very good optics. There's one optic that I put in this category only because I know a lot of individuals that have had really good luck with them. I myself have seen more problems with this optic than anything else, but I can't say I haven't seen individuals or units or law enforcement departments that haven't had good luck with them, and that's the Loophole Delta Point Pro, all right? Loophole Delta Point Pro, if you're familiar with Loophole, they're very famous in the optics community, especially on the rifle optics, right? They have what they call the Delta Point Pro. It is a top-loading battery system. It is an open emitter optic, but there are some things about it that I really don't like. Number one is how you have to adjust the brightness of your dot. Because it's an open emitter, they put the up and down in the middle, so you have to press the button while covering up the emitter, which makes you have to do this. Is it bright enough? No. Is it bright enough? No. Is it bright enough? And what happens is you have to cycle all the way through. So chances are what you're going to do is exactly what I did. Not bright enough, not bright enough, not bright enough. There it is. Maybe I can get one more. Oh shit, I'm all the way back down to 0. It's like, how many times did I press the button? Shit, right? That annoys me, right? The other thing about it is I've not had really great luck with them from a durability standpoint. The wiring system tends to fall apart on them because of the G-forces running through the optics. I've had one where the glass was actually chipped by brass coming out of my gun and hitting the optic, scratches it up, chips it up. I've had other buddies where the emitter actually projects a square with a dot in the middle of it, and I don't like that kind of stuff. However, there are guys in the special operations community, U.S. Marshals, all tons of departments that have had counter arguments to all of that. Can't ignore it, right? But for me, they've never worked out very well. Yesterday, I only had one come through class, and of course, it was the one optic that did not work, right? So unfortunately, that's a thing. However, I do believe in Loophole. I use Loophole a lot, especially when I was in the military. I think they're going to figure that stuff out eventually, but I ain't gonna waste my time until then, all right? Going down to the final category, we have optics like the Aimpoint Acro. Now there's two versions of the Aimpoint Acro. There's the P1 and the P2, right? The P1 and the P2 were not designed for you. They were designed for Navy SEALs, all right? It's an enclosed emitter, and the way it was designed was that you could submerge it in salt water. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not doing a lot of beachhead assaults in my life, so I probably don't need that kind of durability that they're doing. The big problem with the P1, the battery life. With one type of battery, which was a company called Renata, you could get 6 weeks. That was the longest those batteries would last. I don't know about you, but I ain't changing my battery every 6 weeks, okay? On the P2 has a much better battery life, about 25,000 hours, which is pretty long, all right? Most guys I know running the P2 change their batteries every 6 months. That's fine, I can deal with that kind of stuff. The problem with it is we're starting to see condensation issues with them. Because of the atmospherics and it being an enclosed emitter optic, right? Condensation will build up on the inside of the housing, and there ain't nothing you're gonna do to fix that, all right? So that optic has to go back to Aimpoint, and then you'll get it back eventually, okay? That's one of the problems. There are other brands inside here, things like Vortex, the Vortex Defender, right? The only reason I talk about the Vortex Defender is I haven't seen enough of it to formulate an opinion yet, but so far, so good. Any of the other Vortex options, garbage. Don't put them on your guns, right? Burris and Bushnell options, garbage. Don't put them on your guns for anything you want to do serious work with, right? Now, when I say garbage, that doesn't mean you can't put it on your little pocket 10-22 or your Ruger 25-22 and go plink with that. By all means, do so. But do not put them on serious use guns. Do not carry those optics. They're not ready for prime time. Okay?
What brand was that?
That's Vortex. Vortex. The problem is the Defender, that design, and I know the guys that did the product design for it, the design is about 5 years old, and they just released it, right? However, it seems to be doing okay so far. Swamp Fox. How many of you have a Swamp Fox on your gun? Okay, one or two of you guys? Here's the deal. Swamp, you got a Swamp Fox?
No, rifle scope.
Oh, yeah, rifle scope, okay. Swamp Fox is very interesting in a good way, all right? So far, Swamp Fox has been really good. I just haven't seen enough of them to say that they're ready for prime time yet. The counter to that is I know a certain law enforcement department, I believe they're in Texas, right? Where they have put about 100,000 rounds through one optic on multiple guns, of course, right? They have tried everything they can to break that optic and have been unsuccessful. Up to and including trying to light that thing on fire. Why you thought you needed to light the optic on fire, I don't know, but they tried, okay? They have not been able to kill that optic, all right? So that's a company I would definitely keep an eye on in the future. But the really nice thing about Swamp Fox is they are really inexpensive, all right? So if you're an instructor or you're someone that wants to set up a couple of guns so people can try red dots, that's a really economical way to get people into shooting red dots, okay? So that's pretty solid. SIG optics, hard no. Don't put them on your guns, all right? SIG has had nothing but trouble from day one when it comes to their optic systems. The newest SIG optic, which is Romeo Pro Max Misha something, yeah. Sure, it's doing better than the other ones, but it's still not ready for prime time in my opinion. SIG got a really bad rap right off the bat, as they should have, because their dots were not red, they were pink. And because of that hazy pink look, it was very difficult for individuals to refine the dot, especially at speed, because it would wash out in daylight, all right? They've since fixed that problem. They have real red dots now. However, they like to release like 7 optics a year, and I don't have time to keep up with buying 7 different optics a year. Also, SIG has kind of a history of product testing on their customer base, which I don't really approve of either. I like to know my optic works before I buy it. So a hard no for me on SIG optics. That being said, there are only 3 optics out there that I will tell you, if you have them on your gun after today, you need to take them immediately off your gun, never put them on another gun again, sell that shit, and put something better on it. That is the SIG Romeo Zero, the Shield RMS. I'll talk about those two because those two are actually the exact same optic, just rebranded, all right? The SIG Romeo Zero, it is incredibly small. It's designed to go on very tiny guns. The problem is, in order to adjust the elevation and windage, you must unmount the optic screws, then create the adjustment, then retighten the optic to the gun. That is a terrible way to adjust zero on a gun, all right? But that's the proper way to do it. Unmount, change, remount. No, hard no, all right? The other problem with them, again, they're an open emitter system. The other problem with them, and this goes for the Shield RMS as well, is that they do not have glass in them. It is plastic. If you look at it too hard, it scratches, all right? At best, you'll scratch it. At worst, most of them just fall right out of the optic itself, okay? I have had, I think, 7 at this point come through classes. Not a single one has made it. Most of them don't make it through zeroing. More often than not, it's because the lens falls out of the optic itself, all right? Once is a novelty, twice is the start of a pattern, 3 times, yeah, now we got a problem. We're up to 7 and they've all done something funky like that. So for me, don't put it on your gun. The final one I'll tell you, do not put on your gun, and it hurts me to say this because I like them as a company, that's the new loophole. It looks like a little bit of a tube that sits in your rear dovetail notch where your rear sight sits, and it's got a battery tray hanging off the back of it. That's what happens when you have individuals that don't understand red dots and you let them design a red dot, okay? They're very proud that they have what's known as an absolute co-witness. That means that your iron sights see exactly what your red dot sees. So much so because you have such a restrictive tube that your red dot is covering up your front sight and you can't see through it. So all you see is a mess of shit in front of your sight picture. It's not a good way to run a red dot. The dot is also incredibly huge. I think they're at 7 or 10 minutes of angle, which is really big. The other problem is if you've been around this game long enough and you've shot a Glock, you're probably familiar with what's known as a gadget or a striker control device. It's the little floppy thing when everyone sees someone shoot and they're like, your gun's broken, right? It's not that. It's a special device that lets you feel the movement of the trigger if you're holstering or unholstering. The battery tray blocks that. It will shut your gun down immediately because you will not be able to press the trigger on the gun, all right? That's a bad option, all right? Bad option. So those are the 3 I will tell you right now. If they're on your gun, shoot today, but get rid of that shit. Go buy a good optic.
What was the first one?
The SIG Romeo Zero.
What was the second?
The Shield RMS. Now, Are there any optics I did not mention that anyone's concerned about?
CNH Comp.
So I'll tell you this, I have not had enough rounds. I've shot about 10 rounds through the CNH Comp. So far, so good. I've had multiple come-through classes and they've been fine. I just haven't seen enough to where I can really formulate an opinion on it. But so far, so good. Anyone else's favorite optic? Yes, sir.
Just thoughts on Steiner, the MPS.
Oh, yes. I don't know why, but I always forget the Steiner MPS. Right? Yeah, because they're weird, right? So the Steiner MPS, I would put them in kind of that second category, along with the Holosun 507, 407, so on and so forth. Very durable optic, right? The only problem with the Steiner MPS, first off, let me talk to you about the Steiner MPS. They do something different than any other optic out there. They take the emitter, instead of it being on the bottom, it's on the top, right? It's an enclosed emitter system. The byproduct of that is allows you to set the optic lower into the slide of a gun, which is really nice because you don't need night sights as backup iron sights, right? Kind of cool if that's what you like. The problem with the Steiner MPS is it has a lockout feature, which sounds like a really good thing. That means I lock it and I can't adjust the brightness of the dot at a certain setting. The problem is the lockout happens at 13 hours. So once you do that, if you don't do the lockout, after 13 hours, your optic immediately shuts off, right? It does not have shake awake, so you're not gonna draw the gun and the dot be there. You have to actually press the button to turn it back on, all right? 13 hours is, I don't know why they chose 13, but it's one of those things like, I pretty much don't handle my gun when I wear it for 13 hours. So there's a good chance that it would be turned off if I were to be walking around at night and I hadn't touched the buttons. I don't like that. But they have that lockout feature. The problem with the lockout feature is that it sets you at one of the middle brightness settings, which I believe is number 7 for them, which for most individuals is too dim to see in bright sunlight. So you draw your gun and you will not see the dot. It's there, you just won't be able to perceive it. I have been told Steiner is working on that so that the lockout feature will still allow you to set the brightness you want, and they're working on their automatic cutoff as far as when it's going to shut off or how it's going to reactivate once it shuts off. More on that as they release them. I'm sure we'll see a lot more after SHOT Show this year or next year as to how they modify that. So good. I don't know why I always forget that. Oh, before I forget, a couple of these optics. So most of your guys' optics utilize 2 screws into a plate that is then screwed to your gun. All right. The Steiner MPS, the Holosun 509T, the Acro P1, P2, they do not utilize the same system. They use a cross bolt system. So your plate gets mounted to your optic, then the optic goes on and you have a cross bolt that tightens it into that optic plate. For any optic you use that uses a cross bolt system, you must use a steel plate to set it up on your gun, right? The problem is aluminum is not strong enough the way we cut them for guns in order to absorb the pressure from tightening those up to the proper torque spec. We see a lot of problems with individuals cracking or breaking those receiver plates with the cross bolt systems. So you've got to put a steel plate on those guns, all right? And there's tons of good companies out there that make steel plates. Forward Controls is a really great one. They're all their plates are made of steel. They're fantastic. A couple of other companies out there. Just make sure that if you're going to use a cross bolt system, the plate is steel.
Dawson.
So Dawson, I don't know that they have a cross bolt, but they are all steel. They are all steel.
That's just out of it.
Yeah, and that's because all of Staccatos are basically the entire system is actually the Dawson system, Dawson DOS, Dawson optics system. So they kind of have the in there. But yeah, Dave Dawson makes them all out of steel. Any other yes, sir?
Sorry, I don't want to get too much.
No, not at all.
But Gideon, so
Okay.
saw him at SHOT Show, and the price
Completely
was, but I just
unfamiliar
don't
with
know
that.
anything.
No, I don't know anything
Okay.
about it. I recognize the name, but I couldn't tell you a single thing.
All of their models are very similar to existing things. Like that looks like an SRO.
Yeah.
for like $250. So-
Yeah, yeah. That might be a clue.
Right, exactly.
Ain't no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Chris, I went to a show in Knoxville.
Yes.
And I talked to him, and one of the reps straight up said, yeah, I would put this on any range gun, but for a carry gun,
That's really putting yourself.
If your rep is saying that, that might be a clue. I'm not a
So
cop,
it's
but,
good for rentals, but not for.
Yeah, exactly.
all right. Any other optics I have not mentioned that you're curious about? Okay. No other optic question. All right, what was your question?
So we go out at daylight, we adjust the dot so that we can see it. We go indoors, we adjust the dot down so we can see it. We have time to do that. But in an everyday carry situation, what do you recommend?
Yeah.
Right.
So, here's the deal, and I'll tell you what I do, right? I can always see a dot that is too bright. I can never see a dot that is too dim. I will err on the side of brightness when I set my dot up, right, in the morning, daylight, all my lights on, I turn that dot up and it's typically one notch below its brightest setting, right? That's what I see, and I will roll with that all day long. Now, is that the best dot brightness for every condition? No, it's not, but I know I'm going to see it, right? So I will err on the side of caution. I will tell you this, because most of you have optics that are capable of this, you do not want the dot deciding how bright it needs to be, all right? I guarantee you, you're gonna pull that thing out and it's gonna be way too dim for what you want. I want to be able to control the brightness of the dot myself. Now, if you're running a holosun, right, they have that solar panel on top, you can lock out its automatic adjustability, which is a really great feature of them, all right? Therefore, you set the brightness, not the optic sets the brightness. But that's how I set mine up, all right? Now, if I'm going out at night, right, there's other considerations people tend to forget about. How many of you took the low light class the other night, right? The first time you set your brightness on the dot, right? You set it for nighttime, and then you get the gun out and you start hitting shit with white light. Did you see your dot? Yep. Because all of a sudden, white light changes the equation, all right? So that's one of the other reasons I know if I have to pull my gun out, you guys will see most of my carry guns are set up with white lights on the gun, with the understanding that I always have my task light with me as well. The brightness, leaving it bright even at night, allows me that when I turn my white light on, I'm not gonna wash out my dot either, all right? Just other considerations. So, good questions. Yes, sir.
I'm not real familiar with it, so when you talk in terms of minutes,
Yes.
what is, I don't.
Perfect question, all right? So, dot reticles are measured in minutes of angle, all right? For any of my precision rifle shooters, I'm sure you're very familiar with this term, right? Minutes of angle is an angular measurement. It basically works out that 1 minute of angle equals 1 inch at 100 yards. So the area your dot covers is based on 100 yards. So if you have a 2-minute dot, it covers up two inches of a target at 100 yards. Right? If you understand how this works, basically the smaller the dot, or I should say the lower the minutes of angle, the smaller the dot will appear to you. All right? Now, there are some happy places and not happy places when it comes to minutes of angle. We all have preferences. I will tell you this. I am an individual that I shot a 1 minute dot, which is the tiniest dot you can get, for a long time. Precision-wise, I was slaying it. I shot the best groups and bullseye shots I've ever shot in my life on that gun. But at speed, it was very difficult to see the dot in recoil. It was there, but I couldn't really perceive it because it was so small. So I would run it at a very high brightness. What I've come to at this point in my life is that anywhere between 2 minutes of angle and 5 minutes of angle is about the right point for me to see my dot all the time and gain all the precision I want out of the dot. When I start getting a bit larger than that, I know a lot of competitive shooters run 6, 7, 12, 10 minute of angle dots. It covers up a lot of your target, all right? right? So, yeah, you absolutely will see that dot, but you might not be able to refine that headshot like you want to. You'll find out if you've got a very big dot, when we start zeroing, your dot will be bigger than the target we're trying to zero the gun on. And that creates some other problems. Yeah, right? So again, I find anywhere between about 2 and 5 minutes of angle is a happy place. If you really want to get into it, like 2.5 and 3 minute is where I like to live. Right? Good question. Saw another hand go up. Yes, sir.
You were talking about, using plates.
Yes.
Is there any disadvantage to using a plate as opposed to having a direct mount?
Yes, there absolutely is, and that'll actually segue us right into the next portion, all right? So, you have two types of mounting systems. You have direct mount, meaning your slide is cut for that optic, and the optic mounts directly to the slide of the gun, right? This is the strongest way to mount a red dot to a gun. However, there's some considerations in there, all right? Not all slides are the same width. Not all optics are the same width. Certain optics are bigger than the slide you're going to put them on, all right? In order to make those work together, we created plating systems, right? These are basically adapters to adapt the slide of your gun to the optic or the optic to the slide of the gun and make them work. Anytime I stack tolerances, right, I can induce probability of error, all right? So, if I can direct mount the optic to the slide, I will. But this also locks you into one type of optic, all right? Now, if you're someone that uses like Holosun 507s, 407s, 507 comps, Trijicon SROs, those all use the same mounting pattern, and life is good, right? But if you're someone weird like me and you shoot a 509T, and then in 2 weeks, someone sends you an optic to test that uses an RMR pattern, well, now you're kind of screwed, all right? So the plating system, what it does, it allows you to change optics without changing the cut in your gun, all right? So there's some benefits for that if you're an individual that likes to play around with different optics. But understand that anytime you induce another layer, you are inducing the chance of doing something bad, okay? Now, we need to talk about mounting these, all right? It is totally okay, and I got this question in the last class. It is absolutely okay for you not to mount your own optics, all right? However, you also not need to contact your